It's always the best music. You gotta love that.
It's good music.
It is groovy music. Welcome back. For those of you who have been on this before, tuned into it before, obviously some familiar guests here, got some new ones. Usually it takes a few minutes for people to trickle in, so let's just give it a second as the audience rolls in. As you do, let us know where you're tuning in from. This is the first ever Coffee with Coalesce. That's in the afternoon Pacific time.
Yeah, this really should have been happy hour with Coalesce, at least for those of us over here on this side of the pond.
It could be cocktails with Coalesce.
Cocktails with Coalesce. There we go. Yeah.
I don't know if John over here could be drinking a cocktail. What time it is right now? Is it?
Dude, I'm Australian.
Yeah,
you can like, do a cocktail anytime.
That's true. So today is
that's a breakfast good.
Coalesce. We're done with Coffee with Coalesce for today. Today's cocktails with Coalesce. I'll pour myself a drink, hopefully midway through here. While you're tuning in, let us know where you are tuning in from, since we've got an afternoon session today. This is a bit unusual. Let us know if you're in Australia, if you're in New Zealand.
There you go. One from Melbourne.
Melbourne. Yeah.
Got Melbourne. That's how you pronounce it, right, JC?
Yeah, pretty good.
If you're somewhere else, if you're in Europe, that would be crazy because it'd be really late. That's okay. Anyways, today's a special day, not just because of the time, but also because we've got an amazing new guest, Mr. John Cosgrove. I will let you introduce yourself, and then we can jump into the rest of us. But it's such a pleasure to have you on. I'm excited to talk about all the fun things we have. But before we do jump into it, please introduce yourself, JC.
Certainly. Yes, JC, John Cosgrove. I'm CEO at Lightfold. We're part of the CloudWorks group as of recently. Some people would have seen that announcement, so very excited there. Working with the Snowflake, Salesforce ecosystems, data ecosystems, and of course, as you can tell from the giant thing behind me, the Coalesce team as well. We've been big fans of Coalesce from early. That is actually, just so you know, that is actually what they sent me as the Partner of the Year trophy. That's why I have it on the wall. It is made of metal. These guys are not messing around. So yes, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I'm not at all nervous that I'm talking with Kent Graziano, the literal data warrior himself. I'm completely calm and composed.
For what it's worth, Kent, JC was insanely excited when I told him at some point we were going to do one of these with you in particular. So Kent, I know you've been on as a guest before numerous times now. If you don't mind, another quick intro. JC, welcome. Welcome to the first Coffee or Cocktails with Coalesce for yourself. But Kent, please, quick intro on your end, and then Satish and myself, and we can get this show started.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on yet again. Glad to be here and meet you at least virtually, JC. Instead of just on LinkedIn, it's like now there's a face, because your LinkedIn thing is an avatar, right? It's a sketch. It's a sketch.
I've got the hat somewhere. I've got the hat.
Yeah. So yeah, Kent Graziano, the data warrior, been in the industry for over 4 decades now. Yeah, I have to start counting in decades. I was the Chief Technical Evangelist at Snowflake for 6 years, and actually retired out of that about 2 years ago, and went into just kind of semi-retirement mode until people like Armon call me and say, hey, we'd like to have you on these shows and maybe have you as an advisor. And so I do a little bit of this and that these days, still keeping my hand in the game and keeping up. I just came back from doing Day-to-Day Texas in Austin last weekend, or the weekend before. I can't remember which now, but that was fun. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Here I am.
Thanks, Kent. Welcome back. It looks like, just based on the comments, we do have a handful of people from Australia and New Zealand, which I think is special, given most of the time in the last events there was almost nobody, given it was 3 or 4 a.m. So anyways, welcome to everybody from Australia, New Zealand, down under. Love it. Happy to be here. Satish, quick intro on your end.
Yes. Hey guys, this is Satish Jayanthi. I'm CTO co-founder at Coalesce. I have known Kent for a long time. I've read his articles, his content all my career, so he's awesome. And I met JC when I was in Australia last year. So welcome, JC. I'm super excited about this conversation here.
Amazing. And for myself, CEO, co-founder of Coalesce with Satish, I met JC on a road tour where we did where did we start? Brisbane, then Sydney the next day, then Melbourne the following day, and went through day after day, flight after flight, presenting together. Had such an awesome time. It's been such an awesome experience going through all those cities with you, JC. We knew we had to get something like this set up at some point. Bring you on as a guest. Obviously, Kent, we worked together for many years, along with Satish. I'm excited. This is a fun topic. I think this was the most engaged topic that we've ever had leading up to the actual event itself. I'll probably do the least amount of talking today, which is awesome, just knowing.
And highly unusual.
Yeah, highly unusual. Passionate. You are, John, on this topic, but obviously AI has taken the world by storm. There is a massive hype train moving towards the growth of AI. There's so many people that want to talk about it, learn about it, and really want to make sure that that doesn't end up as a train wreck. And there's common quote recently around your AI strategy is only as good as your data strategy. I firmly believe that's true. I think there's a bunch to unpack here, but really it's all related to data modeling, which I think is one of the things that Kent, you've been most passionate about. Satish, you and I have been exposed to this. Obviously, JC, you've had plenty of exposure to this throughout all the life cycles of data projects. And so just to kick us off, like the topic of this is why modeling is key to have a successful AI strategy. I think JC, I have to go to you just based on all the things that I've read that you've wrote leading up to this. Can you share with us from your perspective at a high level, or maybe you make it more granular, why data modeling is so key to the success of any AI implementation?
Yeah, and like we said, we were trying to figure out, okay, does this podcast go for 20 minutes or 20 hours? So I'm going to start with the thing very genuinely. You guys obviously put out the Coalesce white paper on trends in 2024.
Yes.
And anybody who's watching, go and download the Coalesce white paper on trends in 2024, because it's actually an amazing summary of what is actually trends. And power to you guys as well for like the number of things you covered and touched on. Sometimes you read these things and they're just unabashedly about, how do we sell our product? And actually, this was like, when I read it, I was going, each of these pages, it's like an executive summary for each of these components. So well done. It really adds a lot of value. But in it, there's this quote in one section from Kent, right? And I blew it up a bit. I grabbed it and shared it with everybody. I'm going to quote you. It says, "We have to create a connection between natural language, the semantic model, and the technical database to really take advantage of data. This is the learning curve we're going to be on." This is the idea that modeling is now about semantics, right? I'm like, that quote, like it sounds simple, but you've joined three things in one sentence, which are the three things we've got to pivot to understanding to really do this, what is shaping up to be what the challenge is for making LLMs integrate into our world. And I was saying, this is Kent's quote. Kent was like, "Did I really say that?" I was like, "Yeah, no, you did." It was like a haiku, man. It was beautiful.
People listen to you, Kent. They really do.
We do, particularly here down under. I'm starting a fan club. But the one of the next chapters then was you have a section on vector databases, and so what I wanted to do, this is the JC thesis. If we do it very briefly and interrupt me at any time. All right.
I can't wait.
Okay, so people have probably heard about this idea of embeddings. You may not have, right? But as you start to scratch into, okay, how do I do this generative AI thing? You'll start to hear people talk about embeddings. You might start to hear people talk about vector, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding this idea, there's entire textbooks on it. I'm going to mention, one of what the textbooks you can see online at the moment a little bit later, but we're not going to go into all of the detail. The thing is that to train an LLM, whichever one you train, it's hugely expensive. So you would have heard all the stuff about, it only knows the internet, like that's, a limit up to like 2020 or 2021. And people were like, it won't be useful until it's the cost of training a model on what we call the corpus, the body of human knowledge, is enormous. and you actually don't need to do it. What the LLMs were really designed to do was to convert language, human language, into its semantic meaning mathematically, right? Instead, what people are doing is they're thinking, how do we turn them into a librarian, right? Can we bolt them onto your library, right? Like a data warehouse, like a data estate, like all sorts of other things, and then allow it to go and grab that information. Now, this idea, it's got a name. You've again probably heard retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, right? You'll hear that a lot. It's getting built into a whole bunch of apps. There's all sorts of web apps now which are really trying to focus on this. But there's a bit of a catch, right? You might think, oh yeah, this is like asking the LLM to go and write a query. Like the guys at Snowflake have written some amazing articles about how much work they're doing into text to SQL and how hard that problem
really is. Yeah,
it's really, really hard, and it's hard for basically this reason, right? You're actually making an assumption. So what a vector database does is it actually requires you to use the same map. If I could give it that phrase, use the same map as the map for the sum totality of human knowledge that the LLM was trained on, right? And if what you do is you encode, which is really what that embedding is doing, it's converting your data or your document, whatever your knowledge is, it's converting it into the same big long string of numbers. It's like hundreds of dimensional number space, right? If you do that, then what it can kind of do is it can treat your information like it's an extension of the map. And it can do so with quite a high degree of reasonable response. They talk about things like, approximate nearest neighbor is one of the terms that you'll see.
JC, I mean, when you say map, is this akin to something like a knowledge graph?
Yeah, it is. It's a difficult mathematical concept, and this has been this whole study of linguistics and how you turn linguistics into numbers, right? And knowledge graphs are exactly the same type of thing, like that, and that's why part of my comments, which I'm sure we're going to get to, is that some of these ideas, these are old. People have been studying this stuff. I shouldn't say old, but some of these ideas, people have been studying for 25 years, 50 years.
Yeah, it's decades. Yes, there's a lot been going on. Yeah, and it's like, I think that the challenge with all of this, and the LLMs in particular, and the generative AI, is trying to break it down so that people who are non-technical can understand it, which is why I threw in the knowledge graph thing, because people are starting to get a little more familiar with the concept of knowledge graph, and businesses have started teaching people how to do mind maps. Well, what's a mind map, right? It's a knowledge
graph, model,
right?
Yep.
And it's a vector, right? You're just doing it in a diagrammatic form and literally connecting the dots. And is that what we're really talking about?
That is exactly what we're talking about, okay. Right? And so this is the challenge, right? So if you really want to go off the deep end, there's this amazing textbook by Stanford's Dan Jarofsky and James Martin. They're doing a huge update. You talk about moments where you literally have to rewrite the textbook. They are literally doing that online. It's in draft, and they're frantically going like, look, if this is changing as fast as we can rewrite it. Mm-hmm. It's a very detailed book, but it had this amazing quote. There's this quote in chapter 6 from the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi, where it says, "Nets are for fish. Once you catch the fish, you don't need the net. Words are for meaning. Once you have the meaning, you don't need the words." And it's a beautiful quote from I believe a 6th century philosopher to have made, because what an LLM basically does is it catches the meaning, turns that into a math string, and it throws away the word. It brings the word back when you need it, like a label, right? But what it's really looking for is this huge web of meaning across all the different ways that the word is used, right? So here's the problem, is that your business data, it wasn't in the net. It didn't get caught by this. And so if you now pick up this net, you've heard, oh, awesome, this catches meaning. I'm going to throw this net out and catch some meaning, right? You go to try and catch some fish, except your database doesn't call it fish. It calls it S_902175.3, because you've taken source labels from a source system, right? Or someone called it that 10 years ago and they've left the business. So there's this problem where you're going to wind up applying the translator, if you like, right, for somebody else's language model. But what you're realizing is that language model expects you to talk like a human,
Right.
And that's why, Kent, your quote was so amazing.
That's the natural language piece. Yeah, that was one of the in doing this document, the predictions with Coalesce, that was one of those aha moments for me. It's like, because I've always been on the, let's do a business model, right? And what you're talking about now is the semantics of the business. It's not S 1 2 3 4 5. It's a specific customer. It's
yes,
it's EMC, it's EMC Corporation, it's HP Corporation,
yes,
whatever it is, but it's not that number. And for the LLM to communicate with us and us to communicate with it, we have to speak the same language, right? So that's where we're getting back to the idea of a semantic model, right?
That's exactly right.
It's not a technical model. At some point, we got to be up above. We're not doing a schema in Snowflake anymore. There's going to need to be a schema in Snowflake where the data resides. That's the source for the AIs and the machine learning algorithms and all of that. But how do we communicate with that? If we have to use that natural language, and the only way to do that is you got to start lining up the natural language with the meaning, as you have so eloquently said, and that meaning is embedded in my mind, always has been, in a well-defined business semantic model that is divorced from, or maybe better put, abstracted from the technology, right?
Which is it's exactly what made me so excited, right? Is that, like, if we geek out now and I go, so like if we talk about the great work that we've been saying has been going on for decades, as we've been trying to figure out, how to structure information so that it has meaning. You can go all the way back to, like, again, I'll rattle off a couple. There's an amazing book by Hay, Data Model Patterns. Literally was called, the subtitle was Conventions of Thought.
Yeah.
Conventions of Thought. You can hear that's it. I mean, that's that book's going on now, and
that white paper came out in the early 90s, because I saw it, I think, in like January, February of 1992. And yes, I remember such arcane things, because I met David Hay, probably later that year at an Oracle user group conference. But my boss at a software company I just joined, it was the first startup I was ever at. We were going to use the Oracle case tool to build software to support the oil and gas industry on top of Oracle financials. And he gave us that first paper that David had written on data model patterns. And we built the software using the party model. We used that model. And so that was really my introduction into, like, very serious data modeling, where we did conceptual modeling. We didn't start with designing a couple of tables with some columns in the database. We started with business. And in this case, we were, looking at production accounting and some other things in the oil and gas industry. And I got my first trip ever to Houston. I lived in Denver at the time. And my first ever trip to Houston was to sit down with a former oil field guy who's now a manager at an oil and gas company, and have him explain the business to me. And then go back to Denver and draw an ER diagram with the terms he'd used and getting the definitions, and then working back and forth to define it before we ever built an Oracle table.
People have been asking me all week, why are you so nervous about this meeting? I'm like, did you just hear the bit where the dude was like, so I got handed a white paper draft of, like, the seminal classic work, Hay's Data Model Patterns. I'm like, that's why I'm a bit nervous. That's something not a lot of people can just say, Kent, just so we're clear. But yes, I mean, that idea, right? That idea is not only just as relevant today, no matter what piece of tech you're using, no
Absolutely,
what you want to call the stack. And we see, like, if you then go through the progressions, right? You had Armon and Graziano and Silverstone with universal data models. You had Kimball with dimensional modeling, and Armon also doing, like, warehousing, ODS. Linstead, the amazing Dan Linstead with, of course, Data Vault. Again, Kent, something you're very familiar with. And I think most recently, I'm going to say the amazing Zhamak Dogani I think is joining the ranks with data mesh. Every single one of these people, like inside the data world, we can get very religious. We can wind up saying, I'm a this person or I'm a that person. But when you step back and look at the whole pattern, they all share a single goal. Not a single one of them suggests that the meaning resides in the source system data's language. The meaning resides in how the business interprets it. And the whole job is, it's not allowed to be called SID 07555. What you need to do, in addition to enriching the record and giving it more meaning, you also need to think, like you're talking about, the concept diagram. Maybe it is a fish. Maybe we classify it in a group of products called seafood, right? And it's things like that. You don't have to literally sit here and think that what John's saying is what I need to map everything to this huge mapping list of pre-coded terms. No, because it's clever enough that if it saw seafood, it's going to go, that might have stuff to do with fish. But if your entire structure is just yourself talking to yourself and your source systems, you're still going to be able to use them, but it's not going to work as effectively, right? So you have to basically build your own version of Zhuangji's net. It doesn't have to be an LLM, but you need to catch some of your meaning first and align it to the meaning that has been encoded into the model. And
I think a great example of that would be the original table names used by SAP. They were in German on top of it, right? And they were 8 characters because they started writing that at the time when we had a limitation in the operating system to file names, and all sorts of names were limited to like 8 characters. And so it's in German, and it's abbreviated, and that's how people got to be SAP experts, is they knew what that meant, and they did the translation.
We've got customers who still deal with this today that are going through migrations, trying to change 500, 600 column names at once.
Yeah, and when I worked at HP, I ended up on the supply chain team for a while, and my director said, surely somebody has a logical model of the SAP database. And the answer was, nope. There was one company who had produced it and charged an exorbitant amount of money to get an ER diagram of SAP. And we ended up basically reverse engineering it into Irwin. And then I got to work with the subject matter experts. I taught them how to draw foreign keys because there weren't any in the database. And I taught them how to go in and use Irwin and change the names and put in definitions so that we ended up with a conceptual or logical semantic model of SAP supply chain that we could then compare to other parts of the business using the terminology that the business used. And that was a 1-year project.
Totally.
These comments are too good. Somebody says SAP table names, I hate you.
Yeah.
and then Justin G, hey Justin, I know you were actually one of the people I was referring to when I talked about SAP migrations changing hundreds of columns. Great to have you on. Okay, shifting back to you, JP. So I mean
that's exactly.
You've described it incredibly well on like from a high level, the importance of it. So what is the conclusion for you as you sit back and think about all this?
Yeah. So my thing is to go like if I can, there's a counter thought or counter argument emerging. It was there's been a lot of discussion about it, about we won't need any of this because the LLM will do it for us.
Yeah,
right.
The AI is going to figure out the data model for us.
AI is going to figure out the data model for us, and I'm like,
based
look,
on what?
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe if it happens, awesome, right? But right here, right now, you've got people, going to Davos and saying, we might need fusion just to have enough power to keep running the things we've got now. Like we're approaching a bit of a plateau in its power for a little bit. I have no doubt it will keep going, but there's going to be a window where it's like, this is getting close now to what it can do. And certainly in a business context, what it can do. And the experts in the field are saying it's really difficult to just unleash an LLM onto whatever you've got as your data structure or your semantic structure. So
unless you want to see the lights dim.
Yeah, unless you want to see the lights dim. Yeah, correct. So I look at it and go, what we have to realize is that the LLM is in fact structure. It's the model itself.
No.
It's the most, no, it is in fact the most incredible, beautiful incarnation of structure, because it's what you get when you've captured structure so massively that it can do the Zhuangzi thing. It can throw away the words and keep the meaning, right? But it means that, like, for me, and this is something, Kent, you will know really well, this the structure wars. We went through this. I give talks about it, you know, and this is where people start throwing things at me. I'm not against data lakes, right? I've built some. I'm not against them. What I was against was people telling me that is all we need.
Right.
I'm going, it's no. Unstructured data. We got to account for unstructured data, and we can do schema unread because that'll save us all this time. We're wasting our time modeling the data before we load it in. And it's like,
that worked
schema
out
unread says the word schema. Schema means structure, which also means
that's
model.
Exactly right. When I get on stage, I go, guys, I'm going to really hit you hard. There are 3 fundamental elements of the universe. There is matter, there is energy, and there is information. And when you read the physics of that statement, they tell you clearly the information is the connection. It's the structure of the matter and the energy. So like this narrative that we're not going to do structure because structure is hard. Well, guess what? This superpower thing we've made, it is all about actually structure. It's an amazing wizard at bringing us structure that we as a business would not be able to do. No, every business on earth can't go and build Llama, right? Or GPT, because the cost is just immense. But I think it's naive to think, and it's also just going to come in here and understand why we call things the way we call things. And the example I have, like this, again, this textbook that, you know, I'm obsessed with, in the same chapter later, there's this beautiful little diagram of a parallelogram, right? And it has to do with a mathematical solution for analogy. Right. We have a saying, everyone who's done an ABI will go, oh, you can't compare apples and oranges. That's the only time I'm going to do the Australian accent, by the way. You can't compare apples and oranges. Right? Like, and we say that immediately, we're being very wise, because we're making a categorization error when we do that, right? It means that your numbers aren't right because you categorized it wrong. Well, in LLM world, in that general world, there's this other thing, this example is of apple is to tree as grape is to vine, right? And the moment I saw it, I was like, this is exactly where the worlds are colliding. What it's doing is really clever. It's trying to find analogies. It's going, apple tree, grape vine. I get it, right? Literally, what if you're calling oranges apples in your database? What's it going to do? It's going to pick up all your oranges data, and it's going to go, they're basically grapes. And that means oranges grow on vines. And you can't blame the poor LLM. Like, the issue is fundamentally how you've labeled it and how you've put stuff across it.
Early on in the days of machine learning, I got down to telling people, it's like, if you train your model on a bunch of pictures of dogs and then show it a cat, it's going to do one of 2 things. It's either going to call it a dog or it's going to blow up. It's going to crash, right? Because somebody didn't put an error trap in there, and it's going, I don't know what that is, right? Because we call it artificial intelligence, but it really isn't. It's programmed intelligence. It's maybe augmented intelligence, but it can, at this point, maybe it'll become there's this quasi self-learning stuff going on, but for the most part, it only knows what we told it, right? What we fed into the model. And if we fed it garbage from a data swamp, the output's not going to be what you need, and it's not going to be correct. It's not going to meet your expectations, and that's what worked me eventually back into this whole. We got to have some kind of a data model now. It doesn't. Does it have to be a technical third normal form table and column with 4 keys? No, it doesn't have to be that. Right? We're up a level, right? Up to that semantic model, what we originally called, we did it in entity relationship modeling with entities and relationships, not tables, columns, and foreign keys and indexes. It was none of that. It was up a level, and the books you were referencing, David Hayes' book, and then even Bill Inman's and Ralph Kimball's, and even in the Data Vault world where we talk about business keys and business objects. We've all been trying for decades to get people to realize it's going to work way better if we actually model the business. right? And now I think, you're seeing that come to fruition more so now with the AI and Gen AI and LLMs. Is if we want to be able to ask a question and have the LLM understand the question and return an answer in terms we understand. Business, one of our business executives asks a question, they're not going to say, I need to see a count of XYZ from table 1, 2, and 3 in database X on Snowflake in our European instance.
Yeah.
So that it can generate a SQL. That's never, ever. That's not self-service, right? That's not self-service BI. That is not what we're looking for.
I was in a meeting with a venture firm today, and of course, this is a hot topic, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced we could just add AI to our company name, and our valuation will skyrocket.
That's because, yeah.
Don't
do it, Armon. Come on, don't do it. Don't.
Stay strong.
Stay strong, brother.
I mean, we were talking about how AI impacts our product here at Coalesce, and I think there's a really obvious element to this where you're seeing people start to leverage something like ChatGPT for writing queries, for example. But that's going to become
what do they call? What's the one called on Snowflake? Is it Copilot or
Cortex?
Cortex. Yeah.
So that's going to be
so cool.
It's so very cool, and it will become ubiquitous. It'll help people write here, but by no means does that resolve any of the things that we're talking about here. That's more of like an assistant to help you write some queries. But
even then, if you don't have foreign keys in the database, how does it know what columns to join it on?
Yeah, exactly.
If you've done the data model, then okay, that makes sense. That's going to be way easier.
And
be a lot faster.
What I was explaining was that the only way to do this successfully is to train a model based on the metadata that's coming from all of the relationships, all the transformations over a course of time, that can then use that to leverage what it's learned and help the user actually infer decision makings and write smarter queries or joins or things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, compared to just having some copilot that you ask a question on how to write a query and hopefully get 80% of it back for you. And so I think all this relates to your original quote, Kent, along with what you're saying, JC, which is the model's only going to be as good as how you train it as far as the LLM model goes, but it all starts from this exact same entry point, which is, where's the data? What's the data? Is it accurate? Is it transferred?
And you've got to have the structure. There has to be some level of structure there. It's not a total free for all. Because like you said, there's not enough power to go out and figure all this stuff out. And I think I remember early on in the data science, craze, and when it first started, this idea, we were just going to have a data lake and we're going to give the data scientists access to this big bucket of data, and they will find all these great insights and correlations in the data. And their first question was, what does this data mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And you know what every data scientist in the world doesn't want to do after they've just done a data science degree, which these days doesn't do much SQL. They don't want to sit down and actually become like an analytics engineer. They don't want to sit down and actually have to answer those questions. They want to build models. They want to run stats, right? And it's that breakdown there. I think that's cost us some time, but I think that this is a moment to kind of stop and go, no, really, structure. All of the credible, I think, data lake solutions out there would all agree. They're all making sure that there's layers on top that then also provide structure. And talking about AI, if you can hear my Roomba in the background, I apologize. We're now going to find out how good its AI is, because if it knocks over the dividers, I'm going to be really cranky with it. You be very careful. You be very careful.
Is it trained? Yes. Has it trained?
Yeah. Is it trained? How much
on the angles there on your shoji screen?
Yeah, exactly right. I'm very tempted to turn it off. Give me just 1 second.
Now he's scared. It's the age of the machine here, right? It's like, could you have your divider just knocked right over, because it actually hasn't had an opportunity to model the contours of that shoji screen, so it might knock it over because it hasn't had the opportunity for the trial and error yet.
There was a little bit of me that almost was like, is this poetic if I let this happen? This is like perfectly on time.
I see my buddy George Trujillo is on, and George and I go back quite a while in the Oracle world. But yeah, see, remember Hadoop plus data scientist plus magic happens equals outcomes. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This is like the spiciest comment section. I'm going to just contribute it all to the fact that this is an Australia, New Zealand timed Coalesce web event for the first time. I love these comments.
I don't know. It looks like we've got a lot of people from across the pond as well. I think we just touched a nerve, because it's this nerve where we've been being sold something, right, for basically a couple of decades. Oil. Yeah, and it is right. We don't have to name people or anything, but it's annoyed me just standing and going, listen, I've been taught by people who are way smarter than me, and I respect the hell out of them. And like I said, you can add people to that list. I add Jamak Dogani to that list as well. But they're all talking, like the hard work is all just pointing towards more and more needing to respect structure. And there was an interesting question in the comments about where can we see an AI data model from Frank Riley. I mean, that's the interesting thing, right? That's why that net quote is so beautiful. You kind of can't. It has thrown away what we would think of as a model. The model, it is there, but the model has become this 150, 200 dimension vector space. It's pure mathematical space to help it, understand all the different words and meanings of the human language, in their various relationships to each other. And so rather than that's why I'm saying that the job can't be somehow literally mapped to that. I think what we've got to do is just trust they're going to keep doing the job of refining and refining and refining how well it does natural language. Our job is to just make sure that the things that we build are aligning more and more to natural language. And the people, places, things is something that we've been saying about AI. Even when we were just building simple stuff like hyperplanes and things, we're going, the AI doesn't care about your business process. It cares about people, places, and things, because those are the observable interactions that you're trying to predict and influence. So even if your business process says, I do these 12 things, none of them may have a material impact on the predictive outcome, except for the one where you actually sent an email or you actually, mailed something, because that's the event where the other actor can now kind of interact. So it's the same type of thing, is that if we haven't been thinking about semantic models in this new generation of builders, I think that you're going to have to. And I think in your white paper, you mentioned as well with knowledge graphs, right? How even just knowledge graph as a great example of a semantic layer, there's some stats there saying that you're seeing an improvement in the use of then LLMs and AI by 52%. It makes
so you're talking about Juan Ciceda's white paper.
I believe I am. I'm actually talking about. I'm referencing your white paper, which I think is then referencing that.
No,
it's all the way down. But yes,
I interviewed Juan on my True Data Ops podcast right after he published that, and we got talking about it. And he ran those numbers again in Austin a couple of weeks ago about the overall improvement in the outcomes from the LLM by feeding it information from a knowledge graph. And it's and that just, obviously just reinforced the belief that I had that's hey, the models are helpful.
Yeah.
And you said it earlier, Armon, metadata, right? It's the, we're not talking about the data. We are talking about the information,
the relationship
about the data, right? And that was classically defined metadata decades ago. Data about data, but nobody understood what it meant then. And really these models that we're talking about, a semantic model is metadata, an ontology and a taxonomy that relate these things. They're the things that are going to help that meaning, right? For the LLM to have the meaning of the information, not, like you said, the fish in your net. It's
exactly right.
We're trying to catch the meaning now, right? We're trying to catch the meaning, and our net, in my world, is a conceptual model.
Spot on. That's exactly it.
So I got a question for you guys, just based on historicals. So we're talking a lot about the importance of having structure, training the models, semantics, all these really important things. And if you don't have them in mind, top of mind, then there's gonna be issues. Now, I think we saw a similar parallel to this in the past, as you were discussing earlier. For example, George's comment around Hadoop and data scientists equal outcomes somehow, which we saw was not true. Do you think we're going to go through a similar experience for companies that are trying to embrace AI today, where there's all this budget that gets approved for AI projects and they don't look at it through and through with the proper perspective? Do we need to fall on our face in order for us to learn a lesson?
Well, that goes back to my quote, right? This is the learning curve I expect we're going to see in 2024. Is while there's a bunch of us that we understand this and we've been in the data management space long enough to have gone through all these different cycles and see it, there's new people coming into this. We're now getting business executives going, I need Gen AI.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's the thing, just like they did. I remember Claudia Imhoff made this comment at a conference a bunch of years back that she was on a plane with somebody who was clearly a C-level in a big corporation. And once he figured out who she was, his one question to her was, do I need one of those Hadoop thingies? And she said, he literally said Hadoop thingy. Right. And it was because he was reading CIO magazine, and he's like, well, all the other CIOs are doing it, and I don't think I have a Hadoop thingy in my company. Do I really need to do that, or am I going to lose my job and I'm going to be a failure? And now we've got the same exact thing happening again with AI and Gen AI, right? Is, do we need these things to be successful as a business? And it's getting, like you said, the hype train, right? Yeah, you're talking about there, Armon, and that's what's happening. And it's, we'll go to a really old analogy: cart before the horse.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. Is we start going, it's like, oh, let's go get this LLM. Well, okay, how are you going to use it? What's the business purpose for getting that? What's your expected outcome? How are you going to measure success? What are your metrics for doing this? And, back to, I'll say, Frank Slootman's statement, you can't have an AI strategy without a data strategy. I'm augmenting that to, I'd say, you have to have a data management strategy, right? It's another level, right? It's not just a data strategy. Okay, yeah, we got a bunch of data. Great. Yes, and we're going to put it all in Snowflake. Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Then what?
But what else? Right. Yeah. How are you going to govern it? How are we going to manage it? Are we going to mask it? What data are we going to make available to the AI or the LLM? And how are we going to do that? Are we using Snowpark containerized services? All of those things. And how are we going to get that data there? Which brings us to, Coalesce. How are we going to move that data through? Do we need to transform it? How are we going to add this meaning to the data so that it's useful, that it's not just a bunch of bits?
And the thing I will say, and again, this is where people will throw sticks at me, but it's what I say when I get up on stage and do my, old Australian man shouts at cloud routine, is that I go, I've got one problem. I love what's going on with the modern data stack. I also love the communities that are sprouting around it and the thinking. Like, it's incredible to watch it just go so mainstream, right? But what we have seen, and I think it was probably born out of that Lake plus Python equals win. What we have seen, in my opinion, is I tell people the database administrators who taught me when I was your age would have thrown me out that window if I wrote the phrase select star, like literally out that window. And the reason is that an old piece of hardware in the back room would have melted through the floor, right? Yeah. So now, and that's not me saying, you shouldn't write select star now. We've now got tools where, yeah, sure. But the point is that
if you want to watch your Snowflake bill go through the roof,
if you want to, totally, right? But the thing is, for me, that the disciplines have been lost, as it always happens when technology suddenly makes it easier, right? And the trick is in here to go, just understand that, I know Silicon Valley is move fast and break things, and it is, but understand that what we're talking about here is grounded in maths. This isn't just a product or a technology. This is fundamental to how information works. That's why they're getting excited about are we on the cusp of general AI? If one of these models produces information it literally had no access to and verifies it, we start to get into really interesting territory. But for everybody else, right, some governance in our pipelines is valuable. And the reason why Coalesce, like instantly, I was just like, oh God, yes, thank you. I need this product, because I have companies, plenty of them, where like, no, they expect that discipline. They want to embrace, modern architecture. This idea that because, and another Kent quote about the column-aware architecture, column-aware metadata, which is baked into Coalesce. That for me is the key. It's like it's basically, it's aware of lineage. It's aware, which is quite beautiful, of how you change meaning as it goes through the pipe. You can see that, you can diagnose that, and then is all still conforming to best standards and practices around open languages like SQL, right? Also, it can do Python, it can do everything else that it needs to do sitting on top of Snowflake. But I look at it as a perfect example where I'm like, this is a way to give some of the proven disciplines, if you want to embrace them, in a package that like anyone can use this if you're familiar with some of the ideas of the modern data stack world. And I think that's what's going to mean, as particularly organizations that start to get really serious about this, they're going to ask themselves, what toolkit have we got to support the governance of structure during transformation? Because that's ultimately the governance of meaning during transformation.
Now we're seeing that for sure. Like here at Coalesce, it's part of the reason why you have that awesome belt behind you, JC. We're already seeing a ton of momentum in the analytics workloads and adoption with our vision, the conceptual architecture, the product. I'm thinking about, as people take on these LLM use cases, like I'm still like coming out of this conversation, I'm feeling like we're going to have to brace ourselves for a lot of failed projects in that segment before people get their act together. And, again, I think George is commenting here, like it feels like the industry could just repeat all the same mistakes that we made during the kind of big data era potentially. And so I don't know if there's a sociology aspect to this, a psychological aspect to this. Like, do we really feel like that's what needs to happen? Or like, or is that how we feel? Like, I don't know, Satish, if you think that there's going to be a bunch of failed projects before there's successful projects and we just need to fall on our face a few times. Is it a step backwards for two steps forward from your perspective?
I've been in the space for long enough, and I have seen the cycles that Kent was talking about. Yeah, totally. I completely agree. I mean, when LLMs came out, people literally thought it was magic. And, it took a while for them to really understand, like, the model, just says what you feed it to. Like, whatever you feed, to whatever point, that's all it knows. Yeah, it will find some kind of relationships and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's going to be determined by the quality and the volume of the data that you feed. So just an example to that, I know we talked about this a lot, but in 1700s, let's say, Galileo was in the court and they had an LLM and they have to decide Galileo's fate. And they would ask the LLM, hey, is the Earth, round or flat? I mean, you know the answer, what it's going to say, because up to that point, so that's an example of how, LLMs work pretty much. And the other thing that we talked a lot about here, which is great, which is a semantic model, the importance of that. It's a context, right? Additional context to the LLM to narrow down the response and make it more accurate. Like, and I really like the analogy that JC brought up in the beginning, a map.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're in a new city in a car without a map. So that's how it feels. That's how it will feel if you're just having an LLM thinking that it's going to be some magic that it's going to solve and answer your question. So yes, people will fail. People will burn their hands again. It'll come back. Some people are smart enough to, come out. But we have seen this over and over.
It's going to be, we should grab our popcorn then, because it's going to be quite the ride. I mean, this is definitely a whole new wave that is going to lead to a bunch of entertaining stories when we do the coffee with Coalesce or the cocktails with Coalesce 4 years from now, and we get JC and Kent back together.
Can I just, in defense, I want to just make sure that there are so many legitimate uses for massive productivity gain with just the incredible models that have been built by these teams. Like what I want to be really clear about is, like, I hold the teams behind the OpenAI, the Llama teams in just the highest regard, because there is so much you can do with it by just asking it to write stuff for you, by asking it to synthesize.
Right? It's not their fault. People are going to misuse this stuff at all.
The issue is immediately people are going, oh, and we could stick it on a database, and it's that bit we're talking about.
Yeah,
that's what
it's that next
talking
leap.
about.
Yes,
there's so much productivity. You should embrace LLMs. You should embrace, chat GPTs and things. There's so much productivity gain you can get inside the business, right? But what we're talking about here, we're not saying you need to do all of this to get any value out of that. But we are saying that if you think you're just going to spider this over the top of all of your business's information and data and knowledge, that's where things are going to get gnarly. And I think a lot of people are jumping on that real fast for understandable reasons.
For sure. I feel like we all saw this too, even in the case of Snowflake. Like, as it provided access to so many users who didn't have historical access to a database technology, there's a ton of misuse, right? Which is one of the other examples. I mean, obviously, Snowflake projects have been wildly successful, and we built our product with them exclusively in mind. But when it comes to OpenAI and LLMs and this new wave, like, I guess it is fair to expect there's going to be a fair bit of misuse to start before people really start to hone in on how to be successful. And that's not to discredit OpenAI. They've opened so many doors and they've released infrastructure into the world that is insanely powerful. Well, but now it's up to us to actually use it properly for the right.
And that's the key. So that's the, and I'm going to steal an analogy Veronica Durian used in her talk about Data Vault at Day-to-Day Texas. She started talking about cars and driver's education. So if you're comfortable driving a 4-speed Volkswagen and you've been driving for a month and you jump into a Ferrari or a Lamborghini and put the pedal to the metal, the outcome is not going to be good, right? Because it's a much more complicated, a much more powerful machine than what you're used to working with. And the same thing is it putting something in a query into the open chat GPT and having it write a couple of pages for you is one thing, but then trying to use that same approach and say, tell me how many salespeople I should have globally for the next 5 years, and think that you're going to point it at your Snowflake data cloud and you're going to get the answer without some additional prep work.
For sure.
Right? That's you might get an answer. Question is whether or not that answer is correct or even close to correct.
There's, again, these comments are too good. Somebody just said, isn't it funny that businesses that don't really understand their product or business think they can just put Gen AI on top? I referred to that as entertaining earlier. Michael saying, entertaining, funny way to describe a root canal. Yeah, that's probably more along the lines of what I meant by that with the sarcasm.
That's it. Yeah, that's a good one. But yeah, I like that. Yeah, we're just going to throw Gen AI on top of it, but we don't even understand the business. So, how, if there's not enough information there for you to really understand how your business works and do predictive analytics, again, we're back to George put up there as we're going to do a vector database plus an LLM plus some magic, and we're going to get awesome outcomes.
Yeah.
Right.
You can literally get
wait a minute, we got to take the data out of Snowflake and put it in a vector database is what you're saying. No, we're not saying that.
No.
Don't go down that road. That's the whole NoSQL thing again, right? It's like
we built this awesome supercomputer. We ask it what the meaning of life is. It takes 8 years and the resources of a planet, and it says 42.
42. Yeah.
Right. I mean, in a way, that's what the LLM is literally doing. Like, it's not wrong. But the problem is, it's like, but you didn't understand how to talk to it and what it was going to try and do.
Neither of you has the right context.
Correct. Exactly right.
So I'm prepared for it. I'm looking forward to us doing a a reference to this years from now, 3 or 4 years from now, and look at the outlook of how these projects were approached. Were they successful or not? Why were they not successful, or why were they successful? I'm going to earmark this one for the future for sure. We've got just a minute left. I don't know, JC, Kent, or Satish, if you got any last minute thoughts, things you want to add before we wrap this up, but this has been a ton of fun.
Oh, just that it's been an absolute pleasure. And again, like I will at least stick to my guns. It can be hard sometimes, which is why it was a pleasure, to be on the call, Kent, with yourself as well. Sometimes you can feel a little bit lonely, like you're going, look, I'm really not trying to criticize all the cool tools. I actually want to embrace them.
For sure.
We're having a conversation. People often want to talk agnostic, and I'm like, let's actually talk, conceptual.
Yeah.
Let's do that, because that's going to be helpful then no matter where we go.
I'm really glad you brought that up too, to give credit where it's deserved for all the amazing technical people who have built the functionality that is being.
It's incredible.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's now it's in our responsibility to make sure it gets utilized properly.
Absolutely.
And I think that's it. Is the overall message, regardless of all of this stuff, is for people who are going to watch this and are embarking on whatever their Gen AI journey for 2024 is, take a breath.
Yeah.
Right. Approach with caution and with planning and discipline. Right. It is not a free for all. And that's really the thing. And that's where the modeling and semantics and all of that comes in. That's part of the discipline of, we want to get the most value out of this amazing technology. And it isn't just throw a dart at it and everything's hunky-dory, right? It does require some thought.
Amazing. I know there's some last minute questions here. We can address them in the comment sections after the webcast. I think this has been an awesome conversation. It's why, Kent, you are a GOAT, a greatest of all the transformers, and why, JC, you are a partner of the year for Coalesce. Thank you both for jumping on. Thank you, Satish. Thanks everybody else for tuning in and all the great comments here. This was definitely a spicier one, so I had a blast. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Good to see everybody.